Welcome back to my answers to some very strange questions for atheists. I believe I've answered about 2 of them so far in a 20-minute video, so there's only about 40-something left. Making great progress. Let's continue.
The whole universe fit in an atom? You really believe that, guys?
You're talking about the initial singularity in the Big Bang Theory? Well, in that case, I guess the answer would be no, I suppose. Like, I understand well enough the evidence that indicates the universe is expanding, but I don't have the mathematical understanding of a cosmologist. I don't really have the knowledge to satisfy myself that I understand the initial state of the universe, or why it would be that way. And so when I look into things like different versions of the Big Bang Theory, I go, yeah, cool, interesting. Sounds like you've done a lot of good work, sounds like you got a lot of things figured out. Keep on going. Cool. But I personally don't grasp it well enough to include it in the set of things that I believe are facts, if that makes sense. It's implied by different theories, but I just don't have enough strength in the theoretical underpinnings to really confidently assert that I believe it. I'll leave the believing and the not believing to the physicists and the cosmologists, and I'll just stick with having my basic layman's understanding of what they say and being happy with that. On another note, I have to say I'm really confused why this is coming up in a video called Questions for Atheists. I mean, it's not like theists disbelieve in the Big Bang and atheists believe in the Big Bang. As a matter of fact, theists love the Big Bang because they think it resembles Genesis 1. In what way is this a question for atheists? This is just a question for people who are interested in science, which goes far beyond just atheists.
Try to take a cup of water, condense it into a smaller cup. That's impossible.
No, it isn't. I know people say water is incompressible, and that's more or less true at conventional pressures. People who are using water or studying water for different applications will often idealize it as incompressible. If you're developing hydraulics or studying fluid dynamics, you'll idealize water as incompressible because it makes things easier, and because there's really no reason to worry about it at the pressures you're working at. But that's a convention. It's a useful shorthand. It's not actually true. Like, for example, the deeper you go in the ocean, the higher the water density is. The water is being compressed by ocean pressures. Water is compressible. And then, of course, beyond that, we have the fact that atoms are mostly empty space, so they're compressible too. And beyond that, you have the fact that matter isn't really a thing. I mean, it is, but it's not really its own distinct thing. It's kind of a state of energy, which means that those water molecules are not even a firmly fixed thing in the universe. They can be converted entirely into energy. So yeah, that might sound like a good point when you're talking about a forklift, but when you're talking about the extreme states of the early universe, it doesn't really apply. But really, again, more to the point, why are you bringing this up as a question for atheists? It's not as if atheists are the only people who follow science. Far from it. I mean, if anything, this should be a question to, like, physicists.
How are you going to do that? Imagine all the oceans were condensed in a dot as big as an atom.
Okay, I'm imagining it. I'm imagining it real hard. Now what?
That's insanity.
And your basis for saying this is, what, intuition? You know what? Fine. Intuit all you like. I really don't care. What does this have to do with atheists? How does this have anything to do with theistic questions? You said these are questions that helped you convert. How did this help you convert? I'm not hearing anything about God here at all.
All the billions of galaxies were in a small dot? That's fantasy. That's make-believe.
Okay, let's say it is. The Big Bang's wrong. The universe was never in an original, hot, dense state. Question mark, question mark, question mark, therefore God? Seriously, what are we talking about here? Like, okay, you're an Big Bangist. That's great. Maybe you should make a video about that. Leave it out of your questions for atheists.
Fairy tales. They teach this in schools. They're brainwashing children with the satanic garbage. It's stupid.
You know, I've heard a lot of things described as Satanism. I don't think I've ever heard compressibility of matter described as Satanism before. I feel like the criteria for Satanism are getting a little loose. At this point, the term starts to lose all meaning. Can we go back to when Satanism just meant wearing funny clothes and sacrificing goats?
Come on, guys, think. That's insane.
Think about what? You don't even have an argument. You're just saying water's compressible? Nuh-uh, that's satanic. Like, come on. It probably sounds good in your head, but it's not the most convincing thing anyone's ever said.
I don't know. Let's say something else.
That's probably a good idea.
How about if I say, do you believe this pencil had a maker, designer, builder, creator,
Oh, this is going to be such a novel argument.
I mean, you're going to say, yes, it does.
Yes, I'm aware that the only pencils we've ever seen we know were made by people. Can you say the same about the atoms that make up the pencil? About the energy binding them together? I mean, you're going to reason from induction that the pencil must have been created by people because every pencil you've ever seen was created by people. And so the greatest probability is on this pencil also having been created by people. If you want to use the same argument, you're going to have to say every atom I've ever seen was created by a person or created by someone. You're going to have some sort of record, some sort of experience to draw from to make this inductive argument when it comes to atoms. And I don't think you do. Not the same way you do for pencils. So I'm not sure why you're bothering with the argument that you haven't made yet. It fails right from the get-go because you're using a method that may well apply to pencils but does not apply to what the pencil is made of. Or for that matter to the rocks and the trees and the clouds and the people.
And this maker had to be intelligent, had to be conscious to make it, had to be aware of what he or she were doing.
Well, I'm convinced that the pencil was created because I knew in advance that pencils are man-made objects. Now do everything else.
I mean, we see the intelligence behind it. The wood.
The wood. Okay, let's put a pin in that and come back to it.
I don't think I ever came back to it.
The way it's shaped, cut. We have the lead.
We'll come back to that too.
Did you come back to that?
I didn't.
The lead in the middle. We have this metal piece holding the...
Listen, nobody really needs to hear you stumbling through the description of a pencil. I'm pretty sure we all know what it is, and if not, I'm pretty sure most of us can see it. Do we really need to talk in detail about what a pencil is?
Eraser. Now, of course, as an atheist or agnostic, you're going to say, yes, of course this pencil does have a maker, designer, builder, and creator.
Well, maybe one or two of those. I'm not so sure about all of them. A maker, designer, a builder, and a creator? You're just talking crazy talk.
Because it would be insane. How could this create itself?
Right, and now you need to ask yourself, why might an atheist agree with you about man-made objects being man-made, and not agree with you about everything else being God-made? Is there any difference between these categories of things? Anything that you can discern, whatsoever, at all?
But then, some atheist will tell me, oh, yeah, we believe this pencil does, but the whole universe doesn't. That's insane.
I guess not. All right, look, please, for once in this video, can you try to make an actual argument? Why is that insane? What is the argument for why it's not insane to say that things that we know are man-made because of our experience were made by someone, but it's insane to say that we don't believe that something that shows no sign of being made by anyone, and which we have no experience being made by anyone, had to have been made by someone? With the pencil, we have a strong inductive case to support our belief that it was probably made by someone, specifically a human or a whole bunch of humans. It's not an absolute certainty, but it's something we can reasonably assert with pretty high confidence. As a matter of fact, because of our experience with people creating objects like that, it would be reasonable to be very surprised if it turned out otherwise. But we have no experience with anyone creating universes. Nobody has experience seeing even one living entity doing that. The best you can possibly get is a guess based on nothing. And then, of course, going back to what we talked about before, there are a lot of good explanations that suit the evidence, that show completely natural ways for many, many different features of the universe to originate with no intervention from anyone whatsoever, just purely by matter and energy following the laws of physics. And these are all things that people used to assume gods had to do. They assumed that they required agency, and it turned out no. This is the god of the gaps. The gaps keep getting closed. I mean, so just based on our track record, based on the number of times that we assumed that the only possible way for the thing to happen was if God did it, and it turned out we were wrong, if I were a betting man, I would say that the next time around, we're probably better off also not assuming agency, assuming that there might at least be some sort of natural cause, and then if this time, out of all the other times, it turns out for once that there is a god behind it, then we can go, oh, wow, that's surprising. Oh well, I was wrong. If you were behaving the same way you do with the pencil, that's what you would do. I mean, with the pencil, you're relying on your historical experience. You're relying on your knowledge that all pencils you've seen in the past were created by people, and so probably this one is too. You're relying on what has been the case in the past to establish what you think is true in the present or in the future. Well, in the past, the god of the gaps has always failed. In the past, the gaps have always been filled with natural explanations. And of course, there are still gaps today where you can jam God in, but it's no more reasonable to do that than it ever was before, with the gaps that are now filled naturally. So with the pencil, all of my experience would lead me to believe that it probably is created by someone. With the god of the gaps argument, all of my experience would lead me to believe that it's probably wrong, and there is no God there, or at least it's not required. Your argument shows the opposite of what you wanted.
That's craziness. What's more complex, this pencil or the entire universe?
Complexity? What's that got to do with it? A 30-ton asteroid could come out of space and smash into your backyard, and the results of that would be more complex than the pencil, too. And? I mean, the fact is, what you're talking about is not complexity, what you're talking about is organization. And the pencil is organized in such a way that it would be very, very difficult for some natural process to organize it in that way. But this does not apply to the universe. I mean, these things used to be a big mystery, but they're less and less so every single day. Stars, planets, water, life. Pick what you will, at this point in history, these things are pretty readily explained through natural processes. They're consistent with the sort of things you might expect to emerge in a universe operating by a relatively simple set of regularities such as we observe in ours. So again, it seems like you're trying to bring things up as kind of a gotcha to atheists, despite the fact that you started off the video saying that's not what you were trying to do. But these things are not especially surprising to us. Like, oh, there's a universe! Doesn't that impress you? Therefore God. It's like, no, the God of the Gaps hasn't impressed anyone for 200 years. Okay, well, it's impressed some people, yourself included, but not people who are paying attention. You know, when you point to the clouds or the trees or whatever, and you go, well, how could that happen? So therefore God. The response isn't dumbfounded amazement, like it's some kind of novel argument that nobody's ever considered before that completely takes them by surprise. The response is, well, we have a fairly good idea about most of it. Some of it's still a little iffy, but it's getting worked on, so, you know, up your game to the level of the people who are doing that, and maybe we'll start to pay attention, but, you know, just exclaiming your opinion loudly and hoping somebody doesn't know a good response is really, really unconvincing. By the way, I have some advice for you at this point. At the start of your video, you said this.
This is not a debate. I'm not really trying to refute you.
And I think that was a good plan. You've completely given up on it seems, but it was probably a good way to do this. Just ask questions and have people think about it what they will. If they find the questions hard to answer, if they're baffled, if they think that their absence of an answer implies the existence of God for some reason, just let that happen, and you would probably do a lot better. But I guess it's hard to maintain the facade of neutrality. It's not actually about asking questions to get answers so that you understand someone else's position better. It's about owning the atheists, which is fine. That's part of the fun of this platform. I know, I find it entertaining when I do the reverse. So I have zero issues with you doing it. In fact, I'm happy that you do. It makes it more fun for me too. But you started out pretending that's not what you're doing, and then you got overly excited. I think it would have worked better if you'd restrained yourself.
All the galaxies, the solar system, you know, all the millions of different animals and plant life and humans that have consciousness and awareness and intelligence, and there's so much orders, the fine-tuning of the universe.
I think I've basically covered that as much as I really feel like. Yeah, I understand. Look at the clouds, look at the trees, blah, blah, blah. I get it.
You know, that's how much you don't want to believe in God. You guys are emotional. You're not intelligent.
So let me get this straight. You look at things around you and you go, wow, that's impressive. There's galaxies and living things. And that impresses me so much, I'm going to do absolutely no investigation into how those got there, into the natural processes underpinning these things. I have zero concern about that because I find them emotionally impressive. And we're the emotional ones. The people who look at something potentially confusing at first and say, I don't know, have to look into that. Do some investigation, figure it out. That's emotional. Okay. Also, I know I've pointed this out about other questions, but seriously, questions for atheists. This sounds much more like questions for science enthusiasts. You realize there are many, 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 many religious people who accept scientific explanations for all of these things. Are we just chucking them in the atheist camp too, because they're not, I don't know, just gonna take a guess, young earth creationists? They believe in the satanic Big Bang and the satanic evolution and the satanic theory of gravity. And so they're basically atheists.
You know, you mistake your pretentiousness with intelligence and wisdom.
You can call me a dummy as much as you want. It's not going to make me find your bad arguments any more convincing. Whether I'm the biggest genius or the biggest dumbass on the planet, a bad argument is still a bad argument.
No, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. You don't have wisdom. The Bible says proclaiming themselves to be wise, they became fools.
Yeah, sure, it says that, and yet the arguments you present are still the same arguments they were before. Remarkably, quoting the Bible does not change what your actual arguments are. Tossing insults at me or anyone else doesn't change a thing. Like here, if you want, yeah, okay, I'm a fool. I'm a complete idiot. I have no wisdom whatsoever. Okay, now can you stop wasting my fucking time and make a halfway decent argument?
It's foolishness.
Well, it is a pretty tough one to argue against, but for reasons I can't quite put my finger on, I'm just not that convinced. I guess I'm just not enough of a galaxy brain to get it.
What about evolution? You really think you were a monkey?
Well, cladistically speaking, sure. Not in the sense you would say that in everyday conversation, but under a certain system of classifications, yes. Again, this is kind of a matter of scientific convention, right? In cladistics, a descendant retains membership in its ancestral categories. That means something pretty different from what creationists typically think it means, so whatever's in your head, it's probably not what people actually mean when they talk about this.
No wonder why atheists act like monkeys, because they believe their grandparents were monkeys, you know?
Atheists act like monkeys. Well, yeah, if you want to get real, every human acts very much like a monkey. And I don't just mean because under cladistic classification we count as monkeys. I mean that we share a common ancestor with all other monkeys, and a fair number of our behaviors come from that ancestry. Granted, we've changed a lot, but still, we're not entirely dissimilar in how we act, and that applies to you too. I have to say, though, I don't even understand what your insult is supposed to mean. Like, what are you referring to? What behaviors, for example, of mine are you talking about? I don't know. Whoosh, I guess?
You guys believe that?
Like, come on.
I don't know. I mean, these are questions that I had to consider when I was an atheist and then agnostic, more so as an agnostic.
And you considered them enough to reach the conclusion, really? Like, come on. I mean, like, bro, you gotta be kidding me. That's insane. Never seen such wisdom in my life.
But, you know, the Holy Spirit was guiding me to the truth. Yeah.
Yep.
And you guys use God in the gaps.
Oh yeah, the God of the gaps argument. That's a favorite one of atheists.
Wait a minute, we have creation. What do you have?
Well, since we're talking about scientists, apparently, and not atheists, hundreds of years of painstaking analysis of all of reality by millions of people, which carries a little more weight than, look at the clouds, look at the trees. Like, come on.
What do you have? Again.
What I said before. Again.
Rewind and listen to what I said about creation. How does this come out of nothing?
You tell me, it's your idea. By what mechanism does God make an entire universe pop out of nothing? Explain it to me. Do you have anything to establish how this works? I don't expect you to tell me the details off the top of your head, that's just unfair, but you could kind of point me in the right direction, at least. Except that there is no direction, because the answer is, you don't care, nobody's ever bothered to try to figure it out, because that's not the point is you believe it, and that's the end of the story. If you guys just didn't know the answer, or weren't completely sure, but you had some good leads, a good theory that maybe doesn't cover all the bases, but it's a good start, I would feel very differently about this. But nobody's trying, because nobody cares. All you do is run down actual scientific theories and then point to God and go, yeah, but that explains everything. No, it doesn't. If you're going to ask, hey, how did this happen? How did that happen? Well, how did the God thing happen, man? How did he create the universe? Could you at least try to make that make sense? No, because it's not science, it's religion. The point is not to establish that you're scientifically right. The only point is to attack science so that you can blindly assert that you're right based on nothing. You don't like the idea that there's something that competes with you that does a better job explaining things than you do. The correct response to that is not just to keep muttering, God done it though, God done it, God done it. It only makes sense if God done it, God done it. How did God do it? I don't know, God done it. No, the correct response is to get good. If you want to win the game, you first gotta pick up the damn controller.
With all the order. I mean, we have the perfect ecosystem. How did that happen?
It's interesting that you call it perfect. I don't know that any animals that live in it would agree with you. But if you want the real answer, equilibrium is a thing. If you honestly need this dumbed down to baby level, if all the carnivores eat all the herbivores, eventually there's lots of carnivores and not enough herbivores to feed them all, and the carnivores start to die off, making more room for more herbivores. Equilibrium. Life and death. Input-output. As long as there are organisms alive, their life and their death are going to affect each other. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect. In fact, that's kind of fundamental to how it works, but it is pretty effective, and it's all composed of utterly mindless statistical outcomes. Not random, but mindless. If this really confuses you, I guess go read a book on ecology.
Dreaming. It's incredible. Love. All the emotions.
Right. You find dreams and love and emotions emotionally compelling. You find them impressive, and therefore you stop thinking about it and go with whatever emotionally appealing idea you first come up with. But we're the emotion-driven ones. The people whose thought when they encounter dreams and love and emotions is to say, this requires a dispassionate analysis. Ugh, stop being so hyper-emotional. I don't know, do I?
We have history and archaeology and millions of miracle stories.
Very interesting that you put those into the same category.
Millions of near-death experience stories.
People do have near-death experiences. Very interesting things happen in the brain when the brain is near death. They're pretty well documented, and they have overlapping similarities that imply similar things happening in the brain. Low oxygen levels, different neurochemical processes, and so on. And they're very real. They're as real as any other hallucination or dreamlike state.
Just millions of people are just making up these stories. You could find them all online.
Okay, just to be clear, just because you find something online doesn't mean it's not made up. But, no. Most people are not making up these stories. Most people who report these things are having an experience. You wouldn't say that somebody who took LSD is not having an experience. And you wouldn't say that somebody who's having a near-death experience is not having an experience. The question is not whether or not the person experienced something. The question is, what caused that experience and what does it mean? And that's the part people tend to leave out. Somebody had a near-death hallucination where they saw a white light and angels. You know, the same kind of God of the Gaps crap argument that's used for everything else. You don't want to actually investigate the phenomenon, you just want to jump to whatever conclusion makes you feel good. But, no, most of the stories are not made up. Some of them are, however. Recall the story of Alex Malarkey, the boy described in the book The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. A true story, who has since completely recanted the story and said that he made it up to get attention. But that story's online too, so just saying, yes, near-death experiences are very common, but people do make them up as well, or embellish them, or maybe even their brains create false memories to embellish them after the fact. Either way, what somebody sees in a state like that is not exactly compelling evidence of its truth, any more than my dreams are compelling evidence of the truth of my dreams. Even if there are similarities, you know, people often have dreams about their teeth falling out. That doesn't mean that it's actually true that their teeth have fallen out.
You know, they're just making it up, all the Christian testimonies.
No, not at all. I think people's experience of their religion is very real. I think that their feelings of euphoria, of deep knowledge, of acceptance and love and oneness, even a lot of the time their reports of having spoken to someone, are true experiences. The human brain is an amazing thing. It can experience a great many things that have no real relationship to outside reality. I accept the reality of the brain, and I accept the reality of the religious experience. It's just that the more I learn about that, the less I believe in the religion. These experiences tend to be contradictory between different people, or even between different experiences of the same person, and they have too strong of a neurological basis. I don't see any reason to believe that it's anything more than a neurological phenomenon, and the more I pay attention and look into them, the more it seems like that's exactly what they are. It's funny that you think this is a dichotomy, like the only two possible options are A, people are making up the experiences they're having inside their heads, or B, it's all true. Even the experiences had by people of completely different religions that are totally contradictory with each other. There are other options here. I don't know why this is always such a problem for people to realize.
You know how many archaeologists and historians became Christians when they couldn't refute it?
When they couldn't refute what? Archaeologists and historians. So archaeologists dig up ancient Egyptian statues and Sumerian artifacts and convert to Christianity because they can't refute something? Archaeologists and historians. Are you talking about, like, the reality of Jesus? Like, the existence of Jesus? Possibly? I mean, you say they can't refute it, but you didn't say what it is. It's not near-death experiences. That's the last thing you were talking about, but that has nothing to do with archaeology or history. I don't know, maybe you are talking about the existence of Jesus, but the mere existence of the guy the religion is about wouldn't be enough to make me convert. I mean, Joseph Smith existed. I'm pretty sure Muhammad existed. Baha'u'llah existed. Lord Zeno existed. Peace and blessings be upon him. But I'm not Mormon or Muslim or Baha'i or Scientologist.
You know how many doctors saw miracles and they became Christians? Because they just kept on seeing miracles. And people having the same stories. Look it up, guys, you know.
I have no doubt that a lot of doctors will tell you that's why they converted, especially if they want to convert you. And I have no doubt that some doctors converted because they saw, I don't know, cancer go into remission, and they weren't very rational people. Doctors are as fallible as the rest of us.
Look it up.
I'm aware of the existence of conversion stories. I don't really need to look it up. I've heard plenty, and I found it wanting, and that's why I'm here now.
Same stories with seeing heaven or hell. They're not making this up.
Sometimes they are, but I'm more than willing to believe that a lot of the time they're not. As I said before, people tend to see things that reflect their cultural context, or if they have a very euphoric or a very terrible feeling experience, they'll often tend after the fact to interpret that as heaven or hell, to match it to something that they understand. And by the way, the white light that people interpret as heaven, that's a pretty common feature, and this might be related to something like low oxygen levels in the brain. Fighter pilots experience something similar when they're starting to pass out. Could be something else as well, but it's an interesting thing. It kind of makes you wonder if some of the features commonly ascribed to heaven and to God and whatnot come from this. Whatever. I'm rambling.
You know, I spoke about some of this with my own testimony. I have a testimony video. Check it out.
I might just do that, but later. I've still got a whole lot of your questions to go through.
And even archaeologists, when they find, even secular archaeologists, when they find something they don't know, they go to the Bible to see what it is. Incredible.
I don't know what that means. Are you talking about if they find some evidence that might indicate the presence of ancient Israelites in an area or something? And maybe they try to see if that validates some aspect of the Bible as historical and not simply mythological or legendary? Like, seriously, what do you mean? You know what? I'm not even sure you know what you mean, so I'm gonna give you some time to figure it out. We'll come back to this in a week, and hopefully by then you'll have reached some clarity. So thank you everyone for watching. If you would, please give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. Huge thanks to every single one of my supporters on Patreon, Subscribestar, PayPal, all the other ones. If you want early access, sign up to the email list at list.logicked.com. It only takes a second, and I'll see you next time.